Hello, all my anime fans. Habanero here. Today, I wanted to discuss a very particular anime. This one is one that has been on my radar for a while, and I definitely heard about it quite some time ahead before I had started watching it. And I had heard about some of the deeper topics that it goes into. And I knew before I had started watching it that it was going to probably affect me pretty deeply based on its particular content. The anime in question hits very heavy, and hits me very heavily in particular due to certain particular things that affect me very deeply. I'm here today to discuss an anime that I started watching called Wonder Egg Priority. For anybody who doesn't know or hasn't really seen Wonder Egg Priority or really know anything about it, it hits very hard. It's a very deep anime that talks about some very scary real world kind of issues that we have. And the particular issues that it goes over hit me very personally. Because I'm just going to go ahead and get it out of the way that Wonder Egg Priority is an anime that talks a lot about children that are dealing with depression and suicidal tendencies, which is hits multiple things for me in particular that make me very sensitive. First of all, over time, as I've grown as an adult, I have learned that I have a very particular sensitivity to children, in the sense that even though I don't like being involved in children's lives, that's just the kind of person that I am. I usually try to stay away from children, and I don't like being bothered by them in particular. But I have also learned that things such as child abuse, or things that involve the emotional harm or physical harm of children in general, they affect me very deeply. And I found that out as an adult over time, because one particular thing that really hits me hard in the sense of it gets me emotionally hurt is watching media or reading stories or anything that involves the harming of children, or in some cases child death. It affects me very hard. For example, one of the first times that I truly realized that I had that sensitivity of how deeply it bothered me was back when I was a young adult. I tried to read a book called Pet Sematary by Stephen King. And I actually had to stop reading that book within the first couple of chapters because the child death in Pet Sematary is so extremely gruesome that I couldn't handle it emotionally or mentally, so I stopped reading that book. And pretty much I've had multiple experiences of watching movies or reading books where children are harmed in similar ways, and it deeply affects me, and I don't necessarily know how to. Sometimes when it gets really bad, I'll just drop it all together. I won't finish reading, or I won't finish watching the movie. But other times I can get through it and also recognize, depending on what the story or the content is about, that sometimes it's something that needs to be explained, or a story that needs to be told. And the reason why I go into depth about that, besides the fact that I'm admitting here that I have a particular sensitivity to the harm of children, it genuinely deeply bugs me. I'm being very serious about this. And, going off into that side topic is because Wonder Egg Priority is an anime that definitely needs to be seen for these exact kind of reasons and for my particular sensitivity as well. Wonder Egg Priority is a very well put together anime. Now, I'm not all the way through it. I've gotten a little bit more than halfway through it currently, and it definitely tackles some very serious and heavy topics that I think that is probably important for people of all age groups to probably watch and understand. Children, teenagers, as well as adults, because it goes into the importance of all age groups understanding this particular heavy and deep topic, which is it's an anime that talks about basically depression and suicidal tendencies, specifically in children. And it also basically discusses that on not just dealing with children, but it also deals with things that occur in society, as well as how adults and people of various different ages outside of those children are affected by it. The topics are very heavy, but they're also very important to understand. They talk about the different kinds of depression that children in particular can deal with, how their environment affects them, how the adults and, the people that those children respect affect them in those, decisions that they make based on their depression or their suicidal tendencies. And it's the anime overall is very well told. It's beautifully animated. The characters are very realistic, and one of the most intriguing parts about it is the different girls who are all getting together to kind of deal with their own issues and their own life problems. And you kind of learn that every single one of the different girls is dealing with a very particular form of depression and isolation. And it's all like each individual main girl character within the story is having to learn to cope with their depression and the things around them, as well as the various different kinds of death that they have to handle and cope with. And it's each individual girl kind of has their own issue that they have to deal with, and watching them basically have to learn to deal with everyday life and also kind of learn to accept one another and understand that each one of them kind of has to cope with a different form of depression is very interesting. We have the character Ioto, who is probably the main focal point character, and she kind of has to deal with a situation where she didn't have any friends, and honestly most of these characters kind of don't really have friends. There's some of them that are a little different from others, but you find that a lot of them kind of have trouble dealing with society and dealing with people in relation to themselves. So we have Ioto, who basically only had one friend, and based on some situations of dealing with bullying, as well as dealing with a questionable adult, basically lost her only friend to suicide. And and it was hard for her to deal with, and she's basically learning to cope with that. We have another character who is very weirdly interesting and very sad as well, named Neru Aonuma, and she seems to be from an influential family and also involved with her family's business, which I still have not fully understood. But because of her prestige and, having to actually be somebody involved in a large family business, she finds herself cut off from making a lot of personal connections and involving herself with people. We have the other main character, Rika Kawaii, which she makes fun of a lot by saying that her last name is cute like herself. And she actually ends up being a pop idol. And what's interesting is that they kind of discuss over time about how she's constantly surrounded by people and fans and people that want to be her friend, but she has trouble making actual connections with people on a real personal level. She has family issues that she can't properly discuss, that seem very questionable. And it makes her very interesting because you find that she tends to hide a lot of her actual emotions behind acting out and being obnoxious, but she tends to, when it's most important, actually show who she is as a person. And the last main character is Momoe Sawakai, who, very interestingly, is a surprisingly popular girl, but the intrigue behind her is that she's very popular because she's an extremely masculine looking girl, and she is very frequently mistaken as a beautiful looking man. And a lot of her issues stem from the fact that she has lost her personal identity as a female, and it leads to a lot of personal problems when having friends that, especially when it's, female friends that see her as this beautiful man, and she's not able to connect with a lot of the females around her because they mistake her as a man. And that also goes further into a very close friend of hers who saw her as a woman but ends up finding that she's attracted to her anyways. So you have all these women who, or I should say young girls, who have their own very serious issues and forms of depression that they're desperately trying to handle. And overall, it's fascinating to watch these characters grow. You watch them basically learn to depend on each other and care for one another, and learn to deal with people around them as well as society around them, and just overall trying to recognize what the world is and overcome their own weaknesses in a way. And a lot of the show as well goes into really sensitive subjects about basically their meeting up with the spirits of other people who have killed themselves due to similar kinds of depressions and issues, and watching them basically deal with their own depression and growing, and also having to overcome, helping the lost spirits of people who have also killed themselves for similar reasons. It's a very wholesome story, and in all honesty, for me personally, it's made me feel some pretty intense feelings. It's actually fairly hard to, it's in its own special way kind of tough to get through each individual episode because it makes me very emotional. Like I said, I have very particular sensitivities to the harming of children, especially when it comes to death. And so this show definitely affects me pretty deeply. But the thing is, too, is that I can overcome the sadness and the tragedy and realize that there is an important story to be told here with this show. And I really, to my core, genuinely enjoy it. It's very interesting, it's very sad, and it's very wholesome. And I would actually argue that, many people should be watching this. I'm sure that almost every kind of person can be, affected by it in some way in a positive fashion. I think that a lot of the topics that it discusses, and mind you, there's a lot of, it's basically kind of a surreal real life fantasy story. So I mean, there is some there is some surreal moments, and obviously the characters come in and out of being in reality versus some kind of weird dream fantasy state. So I mean, clearly there's some you know, weird fantasy stuff that you can kind of throw to the side and, you know, enjoy it for what it is, clearly, because it's still fun. But when you're watching these girls kind of deal with reality, I think that a lot of people can watch it and also find themselves able to sympathize or empathize with these characters on very realistic standing. So, because like I said, like, you know, what, besides the fact that it affects me personally because of, you know, children and all that, but also on top of that, I can even sympathize with some of the characters. I mean, you know, I think that I didn't have to deal with as many intense situations as some of these characters have, but there have definitely been some times in my life that have been a bit dark, and I can definitely almost, you know, in every episode find myself a little bit in some of these characters, you know, watching them deal with real life and reminiscing to some of the darker moments in my past. As a, you know, as a kid or a teenager or a young adult or whatever, you know, it definitely makes you feel for the characters, and it makes you want to understand them better and know them better, because, you know, you can relate to them. So I definitely would heavily recommend this anime. Mind you, I mean, it's got some cheery moments in it, but it's definitely a heavy-hitting anime that talks about some very serious topics. And I think that, you know, when you're in the mood, the proper mood for it, it's definitely worth a watch. But it's very frequently pretty sad. They talk about some pretty serious things, and it does involve, you know, suicide and depression and, you know, children basically coming to harm in various different situations, emotional, mental, and physical. So, you know, with that idea in mind, viewer discretion is advised when you're watching Wonder Egg Priority. It's not like it's, you know, terribly overly violent or anything of that sort, but there are definitely some very serious moments in it that can, you know, affect you emotionally and mentally. So, like I said, viewer discretion is advised if you're going to watch Wonder Egg Priority, but I heavily recommend it, and I think that it's a great anime that many people probably need to see and kind of, you know, learn from. So I think that's all I'm going to say for this anime, because it's great and I definitely recommend it. So go out and watch it. But I am going to say the last things that I always say, which is, guys, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and like and comment and subscribe. Hit that notification bell. Doing those things really helps me out. Check in the description below for all of my wonderful links, such as Streamlabs and PayPal. And I'd like to give a special shout out to my wonderful Patreon members who contribute to my channel on a regular basis, and I thank them so much for it. And those wonderful Patreon members are Ya Boy Lettuce, Bo Falcon, Fajuk Enterprises, James P., and Miss Rebecca. So thank you so much, Patreon members. I really appreciate you guys. You're wonderful to me. And last thing I'm going to say is, guys, follow your dreams. Habanero, signing out. Take it easy and be good to yourselves, guys, all right?